This is episode 29 of Hoops Forum, a production of Radius Athletics and a Quick Timeout podcast. I'm Tony Miller, and I'm joined once again by my co-host, Randy Sherman. Thanks to our sponsors over at 323 Sports. Right now, they're offering several options on team packs for your basketball program. One of them includes a pack for under $100, has a jersey, shorts, tee, and a backpack. To find out more about what they can do for your basketball program, visit 323sports.com or contact a rep. Sales at 323sports.com. Be sure to do it right for your sports program. This is episode 2 of our series on the pack line defense. If you joined us last week, you know that from that show, we're really kind of focusing on 2 or 3 concepts within the pack line defense. We're sharing some of the micro skills, some of the teaching cues, diagrams, even some small-sided games and some drills for you to use with your program. Randy, why don't you kind of give us big picture concepts, what we're going to be talking about, and then we can dig into the presentation here.
Yeah, I think big picture, we're going to, just talk about things that just happen a lot when you're on defense, things you're going to have to execute frequently. The 2 major ones being closing out, as we talked about last week. That's going to be a big time part of your pack line defense. If you're sitting in the help, maybe staying in the gap when a little bit of penetration occurs and they kick to your man, you're going to be all the time, going from off to on in a closeout technique. And we want to be able to do that without giving up rhythm shots. So, and straight line drive. So that's what we're going to talk about today, sort of how to all things around the closeouts. I think second to that, we're going to talk about defending ball screens, a common action that a lot of offenses, use to create an advantage. And we're going to look at how within the pack line philosophy, the teaching points around defending ball screens. And I think that's going to involve a little bit of talk around hard hedging, which I think is the preferred method in the classic pack line recipe of defending ball screens. So I think that's what we're in for today.
For those of you who are watching live, if by chance you want to reply to this post, you can leave a comment or ask a question about that, and we'll hit those at the very end. Why don't I go ahead and pull up the presentation here. We're going to start out with closeouts. We'll kind of work through each of these here. We've said like some teaching points at the beginning, and then we'll show you some drills that you can use with it, and then also some diagrams and some plays here. Randy, why don't you go ahead and start us out? Closeout technique.
All right, closeout technique in pack line would start with I think the phrase is run, chop, chop. Yeah, there it is. So the first 2 steps being just like natural running motion, and then chop, chop would be chopping the feet down in order to sort of stay in contact with the floor. We want to, first 2 steps, run to close the space down to our man as quickly as possible. Then we need to chop, chop to be able to keep our shoes in contact with the floor so we can absorb a drive. So good teaching phrase there. I think it's a pretty clear on technique. 2 steps of running, then chop down in order to keep in contact with the floor and anticipate absorbing a drive.
I know that you said, I think we were talking about it before, but like those first 2 steps, teaching them maybe like long, and then short after that.
Yeah.
So you get those long 2 first steps, and then the short 2 steps. I think a lot of it too has to deal with, age of players and obviously the length of their legs, but then also being in the right position. Mm-hmm. If you're anything more than that, it's probably going to end up just being an open shot. So making sure position wise that you're close enough that it's around those 2 steps, long, and then a couple short choppies. I'll also mention about the short choppies. Younger players, sometimes they'll short choppy with like 3, 4, or 5 short choppies. And by that point, like the ball's already out of the shooter's hand.
Yeah.
So like 2 or 3 short choppies at the very end is all that we're looking for there at the end.
Yeah, just enough to keep your shoes in contact with the floor so you can change direction right or left to level off the drive, which would be maybe another thing we'll get to when we talk about. Yeah, so second teaching point would be close hard, stop short, kind of along the same lines of we want to close hard and stop just short of the player. And I think as we progress today, we'll talk a little bit more about maybe some scouting based, personnel based variations to that, but I think in general, closing hard. A big thing that you should be probably talking about, no matter what defense you're coaching, would be moving on airtime. So when the ball is, when we talk about moving on airtime, I mean, if I'm to execute a closeout to my man, the minute it leaves the middle fingernail of the passer, like I'm already in that close hard phase of this teaching phrase here. I don't wait till my man catches to close hard. I'm moving on airtime. So that, to me, that's a universal defensive principle: pack line, pressure, zone, whatever. Like when the ball moves, you move. The ball moves you, and with urgency. And then we want to stop short enough to be able to absorb and level off a drive, to where if our check does want to drive it immediately on the catch, we want to push and reach step from that stop short position to make them drive, laterally rather than vertically into the paint.
In regards to arriving on the catch and moving on the airtime of the ball, I have found that that's one thing that you do need to show your players, because a lot of it is reactionary, especially as they're being introduced to it. The ball's halfway between the passer and the receiver, and then they're starting their move, where it's almost you're anticipating. There's a fine line between anticipating and moving too early to the point where you get faked out and then backdoored, something like that. So making sure that, again, that they, like you said, it's hard to do, but with practice you can time it as the ball is leaving their hands. They're starting to move and get there with a close hard. Yeah,
moving on airtime, man. I can't. That's just a must.
It's fun. It's fun to watch the experienced team do this, because you can see all four guys off the ball moving, and that's hard to achieve, and that takes a ton of practice.
All right, next point 3 here would be 2 hands high with elbow bent. You'll see Virginia players. Again, we're using Virginia as sort of the prototypical pack line example. They're certainly not the only team that runs this defense, but they're probably aspirational, right? So the idea of 2 hands high in order to be able to go into a contest of a shot if we need to have hands up to sort of deter vision. Say the recipient's trying to look inside immediately to the post, and being able to have hands high to be able to, like, I've closed hard, I've stopped short, I've got 2 hands high, my elbows are bent, hands are up. And now I think one of the big teaching points is the tracing of the ball. You'll see Virginia players, after they've closed out a guy, maybe he's had the ball, he looked like he's going to pass, he brings it down, and you'll see them mirror the ball and trace with their hands. Starts with having sort of 2 hands high, and then getting into tracing the movement of the ball as the player probably moves it around, sweeps it over one side. Another thing that's not talked about here that I do think is a technique that is worthy of mention is the idea of popping back. So, like, if I close hard, I stop short, I'm just short, and I might be inside my check's bubble, like I'm really inside their personal space, if you will. But then when they, when the offensive player sort of brings the ball down, like they might rip it through and drive, I pop back to be able to absorb that drive and channel it laterally.
Yeah, that's a great point. We would work on that a ton, because what you end up with is you get so close that, offenses today is all about attacking that closeout. And if you're too close, that's a quick foul on your defender there.
So that pop back is just a little subtle thing that you see executed well with the well-schooled pack line defenders.
Yeah, that's good. All right, and 4th one here.
Yeah, I think this one refers to maybe when we're going from these big steps, kind of refers back to the run in point 1 and closing hard in point 2. But I think this specific teaching point refers to maybe when we're 2 passes away and we're dealing with a skip pass, that it's almost like an over-exaggeration of those first 2 steps. I think Coach Bennett, again, we keep referring to Virginia, all due respect to the other programs that run pack line and run it well, but we'll defer to them. I think he talks and makes an analogy of, say, like in baseball, of a player who's maybe leading off of first base, and they're intent upon stealing second. And when the pitcher starts his or her delivery to the plate, there's bam, bam, 2 big first steps and that sort of crossover step with the first one, to where I can really close hard and cover ground with an over-exaggerated first 2 steps. That way I arrive on the catch of the skip pass, I can stop short, and I can be in the personal space of the defender when the ball arrives with 2 hands high and elbow bent. But if I have a wasted and non-economical step, or I step back, or I don't move on airtime and we're talking about a skip, then the ball might arrive to that player with time and space enough to shoot, or put me at a real disadvantage where I'm having to lunge or get out over my toes, and I'm susceptible to get driven, or I'm in no way going to be able to level off the drive to the east or west.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and show. Well, actually, let's talk about types of closeouts. So kind of putting that all together and what you were talking about scouting wise.
Yeah. So not every player is the same, and not every offensive player has the same skill set. So I think the theory behind the closeout technique in pack line is that we won't close out all players the same. Now, if you went into a game kind of uninformed, you don't really know much about your opponent, you might have to make some assumptions. But let's assume, for the sake of this conversation, it's a league team that we play twice a year. I've done an ample job of scouting, and I know the team, and I know their personnel and what their strengths and weaknesses are. We might play someone as a driver first. I think that's called a rondo closeout, referring to a player that maybe looks to drive before they look to shoot, correct?
Yeah, sure.
A non-shooter, a very good driver who we're going to close out short. That way we're using the scouting information and their tendencies to help us defend the play, or the help us execute the closeout better by closing out a little bit short on someone that we know not to be a shooter. And we give ourselves just a little extra space based on the assumption that they're going to drive it or not shoot it, right? Second would be the antithesis of that. The other extreme of that would be like, we got a guy like Ray Allen, a guy who's just got on a catch and shoot. They're thinking shot first. They make a nice percentage of their shot. So we've got to sort of, at the very least, contest the shot, but preferably like close hard to their shooting shoulder and get them off the line and get them out of their shooting motion. Again, the idea here is to take away the strength of the player. If someone is their strength is a driver, we want to make them a shooter by closing them out short. If someone's strength is a shooter, we want to make them a driver by closing them out all the way into their body, contesting the shot and running them off the line. So, so that's the idea of just like make them do what they don't prefer to do. Mm-hmm. And these names given these closeout are obviously given, based on players that we can all recognize from, famous NBA players. But
we're kind of showing our age here, though, a little bit.
Yeah, it may need to be updated. Let's call it a Duncan Robinson for the Ray Allen or something like that, or and then the Kobe closeout would be, we'll call that the Durant closeout now, or something like that, like where this is the complete player. Like we kind of got to do both. We've got to be close enough to be able to impact the shot and aware that this player can also drive. So that's probably the toughest one, which I would argue that sort of like to do both is to do neither. So that's just some food for thought that maybe to think about. But yeah, the general principle of having types of closeouts based on personnel is just take players away from their strengths.
Mm-hmm. And this video will show it here. I think we, talking about, first of all, the short choppies, Kyle Guy kind of going on the short choppies into the player. And then obviously not with the hands up, somebody who's not a shooter there.
Yeah. So it's you can clearly see what we talked about in the first slide of run, chop. two steps of running and then chop chop into the player, into his personal space, into his bubble. Like you said, he stopped short, like we talked about early. And then very subtle at the end, you see him flip his hips to where he's taking, pack line commandments, no baseline, or another way of saying it is like, don't get beat to the outside. So you see him as he approaches the player at the very end, sort of like flip his hips to where he's pushing to his teammate who's sitting in the gap rather than pushing to the baseline where he would get beat outside.
And weight back, and then basically arriving back on balance there once.
Because like you don't have a crystal ball, you don't know what the player is going to do, but you maybe have some information about their tendencies. But like your weight does need to be back if this player does want to catch it and rip and immediately drive you baseline. We want to push and reach with our feet, like explosively push off one foot, reach with the other to try to make sure that drive goes east or west, not north or south directly at the rim into the paint, because no baseline, no paint.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And if we do get beat, we get beat in the direction of where our support defender is, and that would be to the middle.
Right. And two, I do think sometimes there's this idea that we close out and we just raise our hands, and that's kind of the end of it. If they shoot, then they shoot, but they do contest.
Sure, second jumper, right? Like this, if this, as you see in the video in the bottom right corner, they get in the air with the defender on the shooting shoulder, hand up, and try to impact the shot. What you see here? Who is this? Clemson? Yeah, okay, Clemson. This would be kind of what I call shooting over the defense, right? Like they don't really shoot with a big advantage. They shoot with a very small advantage. He contests the shot, maybe speeds up the shot, maybe, makes the guy put a little bit more arch on it or impacts his vision somehow. But the big thing that I see in this clip in the bottom right corner would be that the shape of the Virginia defense is intact, right? Like there's 5 white uniformed players inside of the 5 orange uniformed players. So they just shot over our defense, which we contested the shot. We got in the air with the shooter, and now we're in position to get perfect world sort of basketball camp drill blockouts where no one's in rotation, no one's 2v1 or disadvantaged. We should be able to block out every would-be rebounder here. So they shot over our shell, basically. That would be with us contesting a shot with the hand in the face of an acceptable outcome for this defense, for sure.
And again, check back next week. We'll talk about rebounding. So the video stops short, but we'll talk more about it next week.
Yeah.
All right. So those are closeouts. Let's talk about this small-sided game here. This is actually, those of you that may look familiar to you that follow the Fast Model account, this is the Chalk Talk drill that I used this week. So the ball starts actually with in a defender's hand, and you position your other defensive players already in their gaps or in help.
Or help line,
so that's why you have X3 on the help line there, and then X1 is in the gap. And this video this diagram shows passing out to the 1. You can throw it to whichever one.
So you can skip it over the top,
and you close out using the techniques that Randy just described, and then you're live 3-on-3.
Run, chop, stop short. Then if they want to drive it, we're trying to level it off right or left. Everyone moving on airtime. So on X2's pass to 1, X3 would probably move a little more toward the lane line to as the balls move. X2, obviously, they would move from into the gap. So if one did drive it back to their right hand, they're sitting in that gap. And then, so that's a good start to that drill to check for the technique of a closeout. You could skip it from X2 all the way to player 3 in the left corner, in which case X3 would have to execute what we talked about, those big steps, like that stealing second base footwork of crossover step 1, 2, very cover most of the ground in those first 2 big exaggerated sprint driving steps, and then chop into the bubble of 3 so you're there on the catch. Yeah, good drill. I like that. I like that it initiates with the defense too.
We're to the wise on this one. You play just with 3. If your players can't guard the ball very well because there's so much space, then you're kind of like it's longer to help out because there's more space to operate and fewer players to help out. So make sure you may want to do this as like a 4-on-4 drill to start out. That way there's kind of less space for them to drive. More players in the gap. Kind of.
I like that though. I like that because if like we're trying to create an overload principle in practice, we're trying to make it harder in this setting than it will be in the game where there's 2 more offensive players out there occupying space. So like if we can do a pretty good job of going on to off, arriving on the catch, protecting these gaps, like, man, the game now will feel like a cakewalk, right?
Real easy.
Yeah,
real easy. Okay, all right. Those are our closeouts.
Sounds good, right?
Yeah, that was good. Let's go ahead and talk ball screen defense here. We'll kind of go through several of the points with it, and then we'll again show you some clips, and then break it down with the small-sided game at the end here. So
yeah, probably my favorite thing to watch Virginia do. Like they just really again, all due respect to other pack line teams, but they really just jumps off the screen at you with. Now sometimes it gets them in trouble. I will admit that I've watched them, jump out there really high with the hard hedges and like, man, like this isn't gonna. Yeah, you're gonna have to adjust, and they've done that. Yeah. But a very disruptive technique where first, again, all things pack line starts with ball pressure. Like if you're guarding the ball in pack line, you should have the utmost supreme confidence to get up and get into your man and really heat up the ball handler. Why? Because I know that I have 4 teammates who are in the pack, 1 feet in, 2 feet in, inside that 17-foot arc, who like, I'm going to pressure the ball. I'm going to make this guy uncomfortable with the ball. And I can do so knowing that I have my teammates in support ready to make sure that paint's not penetrated. So it's like a lot of the pack line coaches I've worked with in my mentoring program, it's like their opponents are a little too comfortable.
Right.
Because they've got the pack part okay. The 4 off-ball players are sagging and in the paint. But then they're not on the ball enough, and then like this team's too uncomfortable. They're too connected. The ball's just moving side to side, and they're just getting worn to death on defense by not really heating up the ball and getting. And I would equate it like, think of a quarterback who's standing in the pocket. If he's got all day to throw, man, like, I don't care how good we are. Right. We got to have a pass rush, right? Like, or this is not going to go well. So that ball pressure, getting into the personal space of the ball pressure of the ball handler, creates this. The second, and as it pertains to ball screen, is like, we want to make this guy. I think it's one of your next bullet points. Is like, make them accept and use the screen. Exactly. Like we're gonna push up into the man, that when there's a ball screen coming, they go on and use it, right?
I think that's one of the misconceptions about pack line, is that it is basically a man-to-man zone. And while there are elements that should look like that, you really do have to apply ball pressure. And getting up into them doesn't mean that you have to go chest to chest with the guy with the ball. Like you'll see in the clips that we show you, they're just an arm's length away, but the ball handler is very aware that guy's guarding him, and he's not comfortable. I think that's the word that you use. Like he's not comfortable. He doesn't just feel like he can just pass it wherever he wants to. And in regards to this pushing into the screen, like, you're dictating where the offense is going. And too many defenses kind of just react and just, well, this is where the offense wants to go, we're going to stay in front of them. No, you actually push them where you want them to go on the floor, and that kind of cues the rest of in this case, the ball screen defense. I think the other thing that makes them so, you're talking about just Virginia in particular, about how fun they are to watch in pack line, but then especially once you get to ball screen defense, there are just so many, like, their body position, as the picture shows here, like their hands are always in the right place, taking away vision, making the guy with the ball uncomfortable. And I think that's what kind of separates what they do with a lot of other teams that say that they run pack line. And
another thing about the ball pressure, what any coach that's listening would encourage is let's watch the guy with the ball. Let's look at his head and his eyes. If we don't have adequate ball pressure, his head is up, his eyes are up, and he's looking at their flex screen or their down screen or their curl pop action. He's able to look at all that. She's able to look at all that and assess, okay, I want to pass it to him or her. If their head is up and their eyes are up because of inadequate ball pressure, it just makes the defensive job harder. We're going to defend more actions, more reversals, more the next thing, right? And the chances of us erring in the future go up the more things that they're able. But if this guy's head goes from, let me look for what I want to throw, down to you, now that vision field has narrowed. And it's like they're in blinders now. And that's what we want with ball pressure. And then like you're talking about now, we're using our body positioning to make this guy do what we want them to do, accept this screen where we're going to, I think bullet point number 3 would be hedge from the big. Man, what a segue right there, right?
That's good. That was good. I think hedging from the big again doesn't necessarily mean, I saw somebody actually describe it as like they're trapping the ball. I think that's more of something that you would do special wise. The hedge is just simply, we're trying to keep him from turning the corner and getting into the paint while still allowing him to operate in the center of the floor. Because again, we want to funnel everything kind of towards the middle of the floor there. It's just that in this case with those two, what you typically see, the 2 hard steps out, that they're just pushing him back up the line, but keeping him corralled in the center of the floor so that they can't go back to the outside and cause problems by going baseline.
This is a hard thing to get to do. I taught trapping ball screens and hard hedging things, and I just was, I'd have a few bigs that would do it, but like it was always like
very
pulling
talented
teeth.
Big man, yeah.
It was like always pulling teeth to get the big man to want to jump out there. Like
they're not comfortable. I don't feel like most big players are comfortable with that, or feel like they have, or have ever been called to have the foot speed, the lateral foot speed to get out there and hedge like that with 2 big steps.
Yeah, their basketball playing career up until this point has been, hey, Big Johnny, you don't come out of the paint, right? So like they'll want to sit back and play almost like a one-man zone right in the middle of the lane. But, Virginia has athletic bigs, guys but again, they don't always. They've had some kind of stiffer, big-bodied, kind of lumbering type bigs, but they still jump out there. They're going to do what they're coached to do.
A lot of it has to do with anticipating too. Like they see the ball screen go on. Most bigs are late to the ball screen, so they're already underneath of where their man is, and by the time that they're called upon the hedge, they're in the wrong spot. They just foul. You watch a lot of the Virginia guys, they're on the outside hip of the guy who's going to set the screen. They're already in a position, and then when they hedge, they are low, they are wide, they have big arms, and they use that length to really force the guy back up the line towards the half-court line there.
So if it's okay, I'm going to interject some teaching points that I use to teach hedge that I don't know if they're part of the pack line language or not, but like what I taught as hedges is the first thing is we want to get hip to hip and foot to foot with the screener. So like if the screener is up there sitting, say a classic midline ball screen, and they're facing one of the sidelines, maybe they're facing the left sideline, like sort of looking away from maybe the bench I'm on. Well, then my left foot would be right by their right foot. So I'm up above the screener, hip to hip, foot to foot with the screener. Not behind them, definitely not below them. I'm above them, hip to hip or foot to foot. Second thing is like we've got a side of our body that's sort of to the half court line side, and we want to widen that side of our body. So I've got an arm out and a leg out, because if this guy my teammate who's pushing him in the ball screen makes him accept it, I don't want the ball handler to go downfield. I want him to dribble back toward the half court line. We call it making him go north. I want him to go north, right? Like back up away from their basket. And I'm going to keep this side of my body wide. So if he does want to drive around me, he's got to do it like on a big arc. And then the next teaching point, we call a hedge a 2-second trap. It's sort like you mentioned, it's sort of like a trap, but it's not. It's a 2-second trap. So we would go 2 seconds, or usually 2 steps, 2 seconds, with the ball handler and the ball handler's defender who's going to go over the top, which I think is another teaching point we have on our bullet points. So it does sort of look like a trap. And I want that big to really like get up there and get wide. And if this guy wants to come around the screen, man, he's got to do it to your sternum. Like, it's not going to happen. He's got to dribble north and go wide around you. And then we're going to move that 2-second trap with him and then get off it when the on-ball defender sort of calls you off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if it's done well, like that last point, the screener goes, or the person who's being screened goes over the top. There's no lane penetration. I mean, we stopped them. So you kind of you're back in neutral position, is what I like to say.
Yep, absolutely. Very disruptive. Like a lot of times a ball handler's used to like a defender being down or back in the paint. So they're coming way too fast, out of control into the screen. And then you jump out there. I had one or two players that I coached over the years who developed the good hedging skill. And they would just like draw charges of just popping back there where some out of control defender would hit him in the chest, and they take a charge right there at the top of the circle in front of all the spectators. I mean, like that's an easy call, ref. Just boop, charge, like you went right through her, you know. So jump out there.
Okay, so you're seeing more. People always ask where the ball screen is happening, and then what kind of ball screen defense called coverage do we have based off of that? So 2 here within the pack line defense. First one,
side ball screen, so the outer thirds of the court, hard hedge, just everything we just talked about. Big show. I'd put the word big in there. Big show. Remember, we want to exaggerate that outside part of our body, arm and leg way out there. Big show by the screener's defender, make the ball handler dribble towards the half court line. Yeah. So outside of the third, high ball screens in the middle third, maybe a little more level. I personally, when we taught Hedge, did it in all thirds of the court. But when you're, I can see maybe leveling a little more level with the ball in the middle third of the court. But that's neither here nor there. But the main thing is like we're at least level. We're not lower. We're not down low. We're at least level, and we're setting an edge. When the ball screen is set, that screener's defender sets some sort of edge, maybe a little bit more level if it's in the middle third. But or if you want them to jump out there, there's some sort of edge being set by that screener's defender.
Okay, and then 2 slides here. Let's go ahead and show the first one here. This is the one where you're not necessarily getting all the way out and taking the 2 steps out. But just showing on the high side there.
Yeah, great edge. Edge has been set, right? So the guy goes into the ball screen, and you see how he's hip to hip, foot to foot with the screener. He's above him, hip to hip, foot to foot with the screener. He's got this outside hand free showing width. His outside foot is really high. So if this guy does want to round around that ball screen, it's a non-threatening rounded dribble back toward the half court line.
All right, and then the one with the 2 hard hedge, he actually hard hedges so well that the guy rejects it and goes the other direction.
Absolutely, that's what we want. I want him to run into my sternum or turn back. That's a turn back. Perfect.
Yeah, in the bottom left, what we were referring to there, if he does use it, so it doesn't turn back. So in the top right is when he turns back. But if he doesn't turn back, what you have there in the fast draw diagram, X1 going over the top of the ball screen, the ball screener, and underneath of the ball screen defender. That way he's meeting the ball handler once he comes off the edge there.
Okay, good. So, yeah, man, that's a great example. But that right there, bam, man, that's good. Just sudden. He's just really sudden in his timing of that, and like, just man, that's
good stuff.
That's like, I'm speechless.
That's good. All right, and these you can run these very similar to the last small-sided game that we had. We actually started with a coach and a lot of transition. This is a lot of transition. We'll set like a drag screen, so you could do like that, or a quick ball screen. So the ball comes back up out of the corner, and you immediately go straight into a ball screen there. So on the throw back up, X1 you pushes into the ball screen, and then you can employ all of the tactics that we just talked about there.
Yeah, now let's talk about the trade-offs. Like what sometimes, what I've seen happen in a Virginia game is they get beat with a short roll a little bit. Like they jump out there and the guy short rolls, or a guy gets off the ball really quick and puts them 4v3 while there's 2 on the ball. Some slipping. I can't remember who they played one time who who really first few possessions of the game, and I think it was a tournament game. Like, I know what I'm going to see because we've been getting ready to play this team, and they would slip that screener and hit and play 4v3. So that's the trade-off. You can't expect as a coach not to be able to, or you can't expect as a coach to attempt something this aggressive where you're jumping out there exposing that big man, and then you've got to be thinking, a little bit pessimistically about, okay, well, how will good teams and good coaches counter this and have a plan for it? Yeah.
Okay, so closeouts and ball screen defense. So far, we've covered 4 things. We're going to next week go and talk a little bit about post defense.
Post D, yeah.
Post defense, and then also rebounding out of this.
Okay.
We'll see if we can go from there. If anybody has any other comments, questions about things going forward, but that's probably where we'll finish it up. So those 3. Anything else as far as what we talked about this week?
No, I mean, just those are things that to build into your drills and games daily, and I would say, I do have another thought. Like, I would say, be careful about sticking with technique driven drills too long on this, because as an introductory tool, I want them to know run, chop, chop, and I want them to know big step when they're going from help to man, right? But I mean, a good athlete and a good player is technique-wise and is going to be able to demonstrate that fairly quickly in a controlled drill.
I think when we did it, we spent too much time on that. And looking back, sure, the technique was okay, but sometimes we ended up just not good in games because I think we spent a little bit too much time on working on the small details. Yeah,
and the idea of we're using this drill that's sort of maybe non-live or semi-live to focus on technique. We got to figure out if we can do this against live bullets, and the only way to do that is to sort of put it out there against live bullets, right? So that's maybe one critique that I've had of a lot of maybe ardent pack line coaches is day after day after day after day of closing out in what I would call introductory phase A, entry level type technique drills that we got this. Now we got to see if we can do it, right? And how hard it actually is and things like that.
We usually ended up pretty good by second semester because we had played games first semester, but I feel like if we'd have played a little bit more and emphasized whatever those closeouts or whatever it was, we would have been better earlier.
And you can always regress, right? You can always say you get a few scrimmages and games under your belt and you've been going live and you've done all the things that you and I are talking about right now, and be like, you know what? We've kind of forgotten our technique. So guess what? Tomorrow we're going to get the boring old drills out again and polish that up. You can walk up and down that spectrum as a coach when needed. I just think maybe a reminder for not just closing out or whatever we're talking about, but just in general is move more toward the game-like conditions sooner in order to really let your players discover what stop short feels like to them, what chop chop feels like against good players and against maybe not so good players, because they want to get a feel for being able to do this in sort of an evolving environment. That's the game.
Yeah. Yep. Totally agree. Before we go, I want to tell you about our sponsors from Sideline Interactive. You may be wanting to increase the revenue for your program or improve the look of your gym. Sideline Interactive is the leading manufacturer of scoring tables and video display boards from high schools and colleges around the country. To find out more about Sideline Interactive, visit sidelineinteractive.com. Appreciate all of you who joined us this week on the live show. If you missed any part of the show, you can go back and watch the full episodes on the Radius Athletics YouTube page. Just search Hoops Forum plus Radius Athletics. Or you can listen to the full show on a Quick Timeout podcast. Just search for a Quick Timeout, and there you'll find the audio version of this show. Thanks for tuning in this week. For Randy Sherman, I'm Tony Miller. We'll talk to you again next week on Hoops Forum.